Hey everyone, Jared here with Meeple Mentor. Thanks so much for tuning in to the very first podcast type of video series that we're going to be doing. I will be discussing a variety of topics with my good friend Mathew, who's sitting to my left. So I just wanted to kind of do a first intro video to kind of introduce ourselves and a little bit of who we are, how we got into the hobby. But thanks for tuning in. Jay, how are you doing today?
Great. Nice to be here on this very first of these types of interviews. So appreciate the invite.
Yeah. So Jay is another just hobbyist board gamer like myself. How many games do you have now?
Right around 300, I think. So
That sounds pretty good.
I've tried to downsize a little bit because it was getting out of control.
Yeah.
But yeah, so now I just need to find room for them.
Right on. So I'm just a hobby gamer as well. I just happen to have this channel. You can see some of my games behind us. I've got the nice shelving from Cloud Puncher Games, so check out the box thrones. These are excellent.
Yeah,
I love it.
Really, very, very, very cool. I love the customization on those shelves.
I think I have around 200 or something games. I don't know. It kind of goes up and down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So my preference on games, as you kind of look over my shelf, is it's Omni Gamer, right? It's just everything. Euros, Ameritrash, all that kind of stuff. I have a very wide opinion, I suppose. I like a lot of different games, and I think that makes it. I want to play it long enough, any game to understand at least why other people like it, even if I don't. I feel like that's good just to understand gaming better. And
yeah, there's a lot of games like that where they're not necessarily for me, but I can really appreciate the design that went into the game and why people sort of maybe revere it, even though it's not my style.
Sure.
For example. So
absolutely,
yeah.
That's important. I mean, I don't design games or anything, but I appreciate games, and I think to be able to appreciate like the game mechanics and things that are in the game and why they're fun is a big deal.
Yeah, and I've only been in the hobby for probably about 4 years now, and so I've heard this sort of cycle that you go through of just buying everything, not really knowing what you like. You're just kind of going off reviews and opinions and things like that, and then you start to really like refine the sweet spot for yourself, and then you start to dump a lot of games, as a result of that. So I think I'm kind of in that stage where I'm trying to really curb my buying.
Yeah.
And really just kind of find out what I really, really like.
Right. And I agree. I'm similarly in that same phase of like I'm not looking for a whole lot of new games, but I want to get stuff that looks interesting certainly. But my collection is pretty full.
Now, have you found that now when you're looking at like Kickstarter or you're looking at a review of a game, do you kind of feel that you're at a stage now where you almost know whether you're going to like the game or not based on that description, or are you still sort of at a point where you have to kind of experiment for yourself to know if you really like it or not?
Yeah, I think for the most part, I can usually tell if it's going to be a game that I'll enjoy. And being, like I was saying earlier, like an Omni gamer, I kind of like all sorts of stuff. It puts me in a bad spot because there's a lot of games that I'm like, man, I would probably like that.
Yeah.
So it comes to, cost and like how much would I like that compared to other games that I have, and do I have a game that's already similar enough to that where I may not justify owning both.
Right.
So
yeah, I'm very similar. And I ran a meetup for several years before I moved to the area. Cool. And so that sort of gave me an excuse to buy games that I thought other people would like, which can be kind of dangerous too, because I'd find that if you're buying based on like an occasion or if I just had these 3 specific people, this would be the perfect game for them. A lot of those games end up sitting on the shelf for a while, because you just can't get that perfect scenario together. So I've tried to, cater my purchases a little more smartly as a result, especially with COVID, when you're not getting together with those groups anymore. So
sure. And we're certainly trying to do the best that we can to, keep social distancing a thing when we're out of the house and wear masks when we're out and about. But when we're here, like, there's not much we can do.
Right. So, how long have you been in the hobby?
Well, I mean, I've played board games all my life, from the classics like Sorry and Monopoly and things like that, growing up with them in the house. But I think for me, like the modern gaming wave, I played a lot of Catan in college. Okay. So, like 15 years ago was that. From Catan, I played Carcassonne and even Settlers of Zarahemla, which is sort of another Catan sort of ripoff theme of a game.
Yeah, I've not heard of that one.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's been so long since I played that. I don't know what even to say about it, but I remember that was one of the early modern games that I played. But a friend of mine, as far as how I got into like really gaming, a friend of mine that I played with all the time, we did Magic the Gathering.
Yeah.
And we were both really into zombie movies. We worked at Blockbuster together, and that's how we became friends. But he had a huge collection of not only zombie movies, we started moving on to his zombie board game collection, and I played pretty much a dozen different zombie games, and I was like, wow, I didn't realize there was that much variety out there for gameplay, you know, for tabletop games. And the one that really jumped out to me and said, this is an awesome like experience and I want to find more games like this was Last Night on Earth. Have you ever played that?
No, I've not played it, but is it one of those Flying Frog games?
Yes.
Yeah, I've seen the cover. It's one of those games that I've wanted to play.
Absolutely.
Very thematic, I've heard.
It sucks you in, and for guys like us where we were really into the zombie theme, it's got the artwork and like the photograph images that were very cheesily taken with like just random actors to make, you know, the images and the art and the cards. It just sucks you in. It's like playing out scenarios that you find in like B-grade zombie movies.
Yeah, it's kind of like the 80s horror movie, like you know, thematic a little campy.
Yeah. Oh, it's very campy, and that it was hilarious, but also thematic because it's like, oh, I've seen this 100 times in movies, but now we're playing it out. But one of the unique things about that at the time that stood out to me was one player and up to two could actually be the zombie player. And so they're controlling all the zombies on the map, and they had zombie cards that they could play against the hero players. And so, you know, taking turns trying to be the heroes and accomplishing the scenario goal versus, you know, trying out as playing as the zombies was just so fun. Like I had never seen anything like that in board games before. So.
Yeah, so I mean, for me, it was you know, as a kid, just playing the standard stuff like Monopoly, you know, like everybody else. You know, what really got me into the hobby about 4 years ago was I was looking for. I mean, I'm about 10 years older, I think, than you. And my kids were starting to get older, and I was looking for something to do in the evenings with the kids that wasn't just, you know, sitting in front of the television, you know, where you're just. It's just super passive. You're not participating in anything. And I wanted to have those, you know, really interactive moments with the kids. So I thought, well, board games, right?
Yeah.
So I got like my old Mousetrap set and things like that. But, you know, those games, after you play them once, they get boring and repetitive. And so I just really started looking online for good games for families. And I came across a Stronghold game called Survive, Escape from Atlantis.
Yeah.
And just, you know, heard good things about it. So I ended up ordering it, I think, off Amazon. And it was a really big hit with the family.
Nice.
Because it was a simple rule set, but it had a lot more going on than I had ever really encountered in a game before.
Yeah.
It's funny looking back at that rule book and at the time thinking it was a little intimidating. And now I look at that as a simple game, you know. But so I bought that. I bought like 1313 Dead End Drive.
Ooh, I have that too somewhere here.
Yeah, really really fun game. It's roll and move, but it's got a little bit more going on, you know, and it's got a comical theme as well. And
Murder
then
mystery.
That's right. And then as I sort of this world opened up to me that there can be games that, you know, work for kids but are also, you know, entertaining for adults.
A little bit of strategy.
Right. A little more strategy, not repetitive. You could kind of come up with different ways of playing every time. I just started watching reviews, you know, similar to your channel. And
we don't do reviews yet.
Playthroughs and, you know, teach and all that stuff. And that really got me plugged into this whole new world and, you know, Will Wheaton's tabletop and some of those things.
Yes. I do remember watching a lot of Will Wheaton's tabletop a few years back when it was all over.
I think some of his episodes actually inspired some of my first purchases of games because I saw all these adults like my age having a really good time around a game table. Yeah. And I said, wow, you know, I didn't think this was possible. Right. And I think that was it for me. And then I was just head first into it.
Awesome.
Crazy.
It's awesome. Yeah, so for me, I remember when Will Wheaton did a video for Shadows over Camelot.
Hmm.
I went out and got that game. I was like, this is really cool. I like the art, I like the theme, of course, the co-op nature, and that trader mechanic.
Yeah, that was the first I'd ever even heard of somebody playing cooperatively and then switching.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, cooperative games in general were something that were really new to me.
Yeah.
Where you're all playing against the game. I just thought that was a really
Mm-hmm.
fantastic, style of play.
Yeah.
And I think I'd played maybe Pandemic once. But the theme of Pandemic really didn't engage me as much as sort of the King Arthur theme.
Mm-hmm.
And I played it shortly thereafter, and it was really great.
I think
It's still one of my favorites.
Absolutely, and it is, to my knowledge, one of the earlier like co-op games that really became popular. Like that was around for a long time.
Right. I think it was one of the first co-op games. I know. I think Reiner Knizia did a Lord of the Rings game that may have been the first or second, but this one just because it was so thematic.
And I feel like, was it Betrayal at House on the Hill that came after this?
I think it did.
Yeah.
I think it did come after that. Still one I have yet to play.
Okay.
But I did order the Scooby-Doo Mystery Mansion, I think, version of Betrayal at Mystery Mansion or something like that.
Right
Waiting for that to come in and try that with the family too.
I did play Betrayal with like, it was at college, and it was brought out at a party, and it wasn't even like, none of us were really gamers or like, hobbyists as you might think now. But he brought it out and he's like, hey, I have this game. It's very fun. Everyone gets a role. And I'm like, cool. And that was the first experience with it. And I thought, man, this is awesome because like flipping through that rule book, there were so many ways that, you might experience the game. I realized, wow, not only like is there replayability, but there's storytelling happening now in tabletop games.
Yeah.
And so, just for me, it really, again, sort of pointed to like, hey, there's new games being made that have a lot of depth that I'd never seen. And of course, now I look back at Betrayal and it doesn't have quite as much depth as I would probably think of now, but it does have a lot of replayability.
When I think when you're new to the hobby, it's all this unknown.
Mm-hmm.
So when you see, a style of game that you've never seen before for the first time, or a mechanism that you've never seen in a game before, it's so intriguing, and it just sort of opens your world a little bit more to the possibilities. And I think storytelling in games was one that I thought was it actually led me to time stories, which we were talking about earlier,
right?
Because I liked the choose your own adventure books when I was a kid, but they were always a solo experience, where you're just reading them and flipping pages and things like this. And now you've got this game where, you're playing with friends cooperatively, sharing a story, and yet you're still making decisions that can change the course of the game.
It's hard to even say it's a board game. Like it's just more of like an experience, that brings people into a story together.
Yeah, and the power of story. I mean, when you think of the popularity of D&D and all these other similar RPGs, it's probably next to Magic, maybe the largest kind of area within this hobby. And you, especially with Stranger Things, the popularity of the TV show Stranger Things, that pulled a lot of people into D&D as well. Looking for those, I think it's just a human thing, right? Looking for those shared sort of storytelling experiences.
Absolutely.
It's powerful.
And as far as tabletop gaming today, there's so much screen time that we're introduced to. We've got our phones always on us. We have so many ways to stream, content, video, and I think people are sort of at this point where they're looking for that personal connection, that sitting across from someone and actually like engaging in a social like friendship way where it's not just text, it's not just via a screen, but you're actually talking to someone in front of you. And I think that's really what's drawn the rise in especially the last decade, in my opinion, for the board game industry.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it is primarily mobile devices because parents are having a lot harder time, especially older parents, connecting with their kids because they're always in front of a screen, and it's hard to sometimes it's hard to relate or to find those moments where you're doing something that's also engaging to them, you know. And one thing I love about board games is, you know, when you do put the phones away and you're able to sit with friends, everybody at the table is equal.
Yeah.
You know,
levels the playing field.
Levels the playing field. I've had games where you've had, you know, a 7-year-old and a 77-year-old at the same table, and it sort of that barrier of age is broken down because you're all, you know, sharing this experience together, and you're all, you know, following that kind of that what the circle they call it, the magic circle, I think it is.
Okay.
Where you're kind of putting yourself in a place where everybody's agreeing to, you know, the rules, and you're all playing by the same rules, and that you're, you know, and within the boundaries of the rules. And so, you know, it creates that kind of very interactive experience with games that I don't think you can get through a lot of other media.
Yeah. And it keeps the discussion too at a relevant pace that, you know, if you're just sitting down and there's not a centrally unifying thing going on, people are either going to get distracted, stare at their phones, or discuss various things that are going to alienate other people, because there's so much out there and you have access to all of it at all times.
Yes.
You know, you couldn't have that age disparity happen without something like a board game to sit in front of you. And they're also a very tactile type of thing that you can keep from years and years and years, and they never change. Whereas like even, you know, video games, like they change weeks after they're released. All of a sudden there's patches, and now like this area is harder, this area is easier. So your experience that you had when you originally bought your video game is not the same experience you're going to have when you play it next year. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's I mean, we certainly see, you know, lifestyle games in our hobby as well. But for the most part, the games that you play, you know, you don't have to sort of keep up with them. Yeah. Like you said, you dust them off the shelf. 6 months later, it's the same experience.
You know exactly what
you're
getting
into.
Right.
You don't show up and there's something completely new going on. And I think that's where that kind of barrier to entry into the hobby is a lot lower. And it's less intimidating. That you can start to get people who normally might not gravitate to some of those other, you know, media sources to try a board game. Yeah, you know, especially if it has an engaging theme.
And as accessible as it is to do that, unfortunately with gaming or board gaming specifically, there's the cost of the game itself, which can oftentimes get, you know, block certain people out or whatnot. But also, if you're not already in the industry or like familiar with current modern board games, you don't know where to start. You don't know what games you might like, and you may not have people to play them with. So those are the kinds of barriers that I'd like to try to break down as much as possible. And one of the things that, you know, led me to create this YouTube channel was to decrease the barrier to entry on playing what would be considered more difficult games. Because if you are playing games that are lighter, but you might be interested in some heavier games, if only someone were to teach it to you. You may not have that friend who already has that game, who already can teach it, because those are two different things. Having the game and being able to teach it to someone, you know, that's a skill set. And so the idea, you know, part of the channel is to try to create videos that are as helpful as possible and detailed as possible, so that you don't have to have a knowledge of the rule book. You can just watch the video or use it to help you guide yourself through the first one or two games, and hopefully get introduced to a wider variety of games that are out there. And I found so many that in the years that I've been in the hobby, especially recently, that I know that there's a lot of great games out there that a lot of people are just gonna miss because they're not in the hobby, or they're not they don't know about the game. So certainly having a tutorial video out there brings awareness to the game itself, and it also hopefully gets them feeling comfortable enough to want to try it and maybe buy it, and they can play it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, and certain people are, you know, more visual learners anyway. So thinking of like reading through a 30-page rule book for a game, you know, it's kind of like, is the dive worth the pearl, right? Yeah. So I think a lot of people, they look at that and they say, I'm going to spend, you know, hours trying to learn this game. Am I going to get hours of enjoyment out of it? You know, and so videos for me are my primary source of whenever there's a game I'm interested in. I'd much rather watch a video than a rule book.
Yep.
And I kind of compare it to like audiobooks
Mhm.
versus just reading, because
Mhm.
a lot of people when they're reading, they might read a paragraph and they're like, okay, I need to read this paragraph again because I'm not sure I really got it. But what I found is when I listen to somebody reading to me,
Mhm.
it's a lot easier for me to sort of grasp the concepts the first time,
Mhm.
and I find that I sail through an audiobook much faster than if I was reading it, in person.
Sure.
And that's the same way it is for me watching video tutorials.
Cool. So currently, there's all kinds of games out there. I mean, you
Mm.
mentioned 300 games in your collection,
Yeah.
but I mean, what are one or two of some of your notable games or favorites that you like to play?
Yeah, so I really like Teotihuacan. I think it's a really cool dice worker placement game.
Mhm.
I was a big, and still am a big fan of Zolkin.
Mhm.
But what I found with because they're shared designers,
Mhm.
what I found with Teotihuacan is it gives you a little bit more freedom. It's a little less tight when it comes to like feeding your people and things like that.
Mhm.
It's a little more forgiving.
Mhm.
Whereas, if you're playing Zolkin and you're stuck on one of the wheels that are going around,
Mhm.
you have to really time things precisely in order to do the actions that you want.
Mhm.
Whereas with Zolkin, you can kind of make mistakes and
Or
catch up.
Teotihuacan.
Or sorry,
Yeah.
Teotihuacan.
Yeah.
You can kind of make mistakes and recover from those a little bit easier.
Right.
And I think that just the whole concept of kind of going around in a rondelle and
Mhm.
moving a certain amount of spaces, I really love that in games.
Mhm.
So that's one of my favorites. I think another one, I love Scythe. I
Mhm.
think the first thing with Scythe is just the artwork and the world building um, really pulled me into that game. And with this, alternative sort of, is it World War One or World War Two? I think kind of
I think it was
theme.
World War One, maybe.
Yeah, I think you're right. But still having kind of mechs and all this stuff in it, and
Definitely a reimagined theme.
definitely reimagined. So the artwork, and then it's really very much a Euro game where it looks more like a sort of dudes on a map combat game, and there is combat in it,
Yeah.
but it's more
It's a very slow
strategic,
combat.
yeah, card driven. It's not very frequent typically.
Right. You might get in two at the most.
Right.
Two combats.
Right, but I think I just love the way that sort of the build up of the game where you're trying to compete for these different achievements,
Mhm.
and it's very very slow at first, but then once you kind of get things going and you're comboing different actions,
Mhm.
it really takes off. So I think those are two of my top favorites right now.
Awesome.
What about you?
For me, I think Maracaibo. It came out this year. It came out this year, right?
I think it did, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, at least in the U.S.
Yeah. Maracaibo, I felt was really hit home for me because originally I think Great Western Trail was one of my favorites. And what Alexander Pfister, the designer, did with Maracaibo was sort of break out sort of the limitations that Great Western Trail had. I have to compare them because they're very similar in how they work. I won't go into all that because you can watch the tutorial. But in Great Western Trail, you've got workers that you can hire, and based on who you're hiring, it'll improve certain actions that you're going to take during the game. And so once you start hiring these guys, because you can only hire them at certain locations, you're sort of limited from the get-go as to the path that you're going to be taking for your overall strategy. And so with Maracaibo, they basically took away that restriction and said, okay, every card can kind of do all of this stuff. And because you cycle through so many cards in the game, you're going to find stuff that allows you to do those sort of benefits that would have taken you longer and, stuck with that same plan in Great Western Trail. The other interesting thing I thought that was a good improvement with Maracaibo is there's more split paths that you can take as you move around the oceans, and you can move further. So instead of like 3 spaces, you can go up to 7,
Right.
which is a big change, and it really just adds a lot of flexibility with your strategy. So that one's definitely a big one that I like to play for sure.
Yeah, I played it once actually with you.
Right.
That was my first time playing it, and really enjoyed the game. I actually similar to Teotihuacan, where you can kind of keep going around the rondelle. I really liked in Maracaibo that mechanic with the ship where you could go up to 7 spaces, kind of around the islands, and choose when you wanted to stop. I've always loved that in games. And what I find is it's one of those games that after the first play, I thought about like for a couple days after that.
Mm.
And a lot of times when I play a game where it kind of keeps me thinking about it
Mm-hmm.
And thinking about what would I've done differently.
Yeah.
Those are typically the ones that I end up really liking and then ultimately adding to my collection.
Wow.
Scythe was an example of that, where I didn't know how I felt about it the first time I played it, but I knew there was something that intrigued me about it.
Yeah. And the games that have that kind of depth to strategy with a wide variety of choices to win, that's where I sort of hang my hat. You know, those are my top favorites is games like that.
Now with Maracaibo, you've played some of the campaign, right?
Right.
Campaign-based game.
Right.
What are your feelings and thoughts on the campaign version of that?
Sure. I haven't played through it all. Obviously, I've only done a few games of it into the campaign. I like how simple it is to set up as far as the campaign goes, and to save the system, you know, save where you're at. And they do, like, the game includes a lot of legacy tiles that they call them legacy tiles that you can add over the board that changes the actions available. It changes the movement, you know, and places around the board that you can go. So I'm really looking forward to how it's going to end up and how long it's going to take us to get through. So I think it's overall well done, and it's not, it doesn't really beat you over the head too much with story. I mean, it's essentially still playing Maracaibo, and you can play it. You can start someone on a campaign, honestly, because there's not that much new that you need to learn about to play. It just adds something a little extra to your experience.
And I know Alexander Pfister is kind of a pioneer for adding some of this kind of story campaign elements to Euro games.
Absolutely.
Have you got a sense for, like, do you feel the story across the campaign, is it strong story, or is it just sort of enough to kind of get you to the next game? Or
it has its twists and turns, and that's, you know, a lot of times you have to make decisions as a group on what path you want to take when you go into you know, when you complete a certain quest or what have you. And so I don't know what all the branching story paths are going to do, but I like that element is in it, because that adds sort of like a feel when you play a legacy game where there's new changes coming. You don't know how it's going to affect the game. So I can't
neat.
say I've not played the whole thing. So
yeah, that's neat. Have you heard of the new Alexander Pfister game, Cloud Age?
No, what's that about?
So it got a lot of buzz because of just the cover.
Okay.
And it's a really great cover as far as artwork goes. It has sort of a background showing kind of like a wasteland scene, but then in the sky is like a Zeppelin or a hot air balloon. And I guess the theme is it's sort of post-apocalyptic, but it's not sort of a like everything is really bad and decrepit. It's just sort of like you're recovering from this post-apocalyptic.
The rebuild phase.
Yeah, the rebuild phase. And I guess everybody there's either no more oil reserves because of some catastrophic accident, so that's why people are flying around in like airships. But I guess it's introducing, it's an engine building game, but what I've heard is it's introducing this sort of card sleeving mechanism. So you're using the same cards, but then when you put a sleeve on the card, you get you upgrade the abilities of that card.
Excellent.
And supposedly it's only like a 90-minute game and sort of more like family weight style. So I've heard it's available for like pre-order now.
Okay.
So it was one I did buy because I really liked Maracaibo when we played it, but I thought it'd be fun to play a Pfister game where I could actually play it with my family too.
Yes.
So it seems like it might fit the bill for that.
Awesome. That sounds really good.
Yeah,
I played
theme seems cool.
The Edge of Darkness, which is it's sort of based on the Mystic Vale card building type of game where you've got those card sleeves and you can add upgrades, which are usually very transparent, and so you just slide them over into the sleeve, and then now that card is more powerful or has a different effect. Another game that I'm currently backing is called Canvas. Have you heard of that?
Canvas. Boy, that sounds familiar. Is that the one that has the translucent cards? Yeah. Okay.
It's got this painting artwork theme, and you've got an easel that you can put your final artwork piece on. And as you get cards, you're building your painting with various elements into a single, into your canvas. I don't know all the scoring of the game, but I mean the artwork and the style certainly was interesting enough for me to want to back.
Yeah, you're right. It reminded me because I remember just the sort of the aesthetics alone of that game caused a lot of people to back it.
Yeah.
No idea if it's going to be like a good
Who
game or
knows?
not, but it looks really good.
It looks good.
Yeah,
So
it looks really good.
I'm hopeful.
So getting back to kind of origins of how we sort of got into gaming and started different things. So what led you to start doing videos and tutorials? What kind of, I guess, made you change from being a consumer to kind of an active participant in being a content creator?
Right. Well, it started with wanting to play Archipelago. If you haven't played it, it's great. It's a lot of fun, and yet it's complicated to understand at first. And I was getting together my game group and wanting to teach them how to play Archipelago. But I was thinking, if it takes me a while to teach them, then we're not going to have as much time to play it. And so I was like, what if I just record a video of me teaching it, and then they can just watch that. I'll send it to them. And that way they'll know how to play by the time we get there. So once we set up, we just start playing. That was the idea. And so I just set up a tripod and my camera and sat in the kitchen. I didn't worry about any kind of production quality. In fact, if you watch the video, because it's on my other channel, but like my head is cut off from the screen. It's like I didn't even
the framing wasn't
care.
great.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah,
I didn't care. But I just wanted to like film something that showed them how to play. So I created it. It's sort of like, this is my first attempt at creating a video and editing and stuff like that. So it took forever. It took a long time to like learn how to, do all that stuff. But I got it to a point where I was happy with it. I put it out there on my personal YouTube channel at the time. And that was the very first video that I did.
And how long after that was it before you said, I'm going to try this another time, a second time?
Right. So at least a year.
Okay.
It was at least a year later, and I wanted to try to find a way to make a consistent channel that was dedicated to just tutorial videos. Having seen, how my video had done over that course of the year, and seeing what the industry looked like as far as content creators, it looked like that it would actually be useful to more than just my personal friends to have a channel that had more tutorials out there.
Right.
I'm usually the one in my game group to teach games. And so I don't mind teaching. I like teaching it. And I like reading the rule books. I don't mind reading those 30-page rule books. Yeah. I think it's interesting. So it always fell to me to teach. And I thought, okay, well, if it could be useful to other people, then I'll start writing, some actual scripts or ways to teach other games that, my friends would enjoy, but also maybe, other gamers out in the world would also enjoy.
Now, did you find that by doing this and then starting to do this a lot more consistently, did it sort of take over a lot of the time you were spending actually playing games? Like, did it eat into your hobby side as well?
I mean, yes and no. Like, I always make time to play games, and when it started early on with the planning and the deciding which games to do and writing the scripts, and early on there was a lot of work, and yes, it did kind of eat into some of my weekends. But I thought, if I put in the work now, everything's going to be streamlined later. And so, and I wanted it to be as good as I could make it on my first attempt, for the new channel. And so I was okay with like a little bit of sacrifice, but at the same time, I still wanted to have my game nights and stuff like that.
Right.
But one of the ways that I got through that sort of preparation phase, which was about 6 months of preparation before the first tutorial went live on the channel, I found a friend of mine who was more knowledgeable than I was about creating videos, and he had a camera, and he had, experience with green screen and lighting and miking and stuff like that. He was a friend from church. And so we filmed the first few videos for the channel at our church. Okay. And so he helped with all the editing for the first 3 or 4 videos. But I sat and watched how he was doing it and asked a lot of questions. And I was sort of learning from watching.
Right.
And while he did the first editing stuff, it allowed me to get an idea for what I needed to be doing if I were to take over, because what he realized was this is a lot more work than he had in mind to sort of help me long term.
Right.
So he really helped me get through that jump start period and helped me at least get the confidence of saying, okay, I can get to this level of quality of a video and to this level of skill to be able to replicate what he did. And that's really what gave me my first jump start into making videos for this channel.
Yeah, and I've heard the same thing that when you get into it, you think, oh, I'm going to make YouTube videos, but you don't realize there's so much sort of technical work with editing, and like you had to learn new skills, just to do all that stuff. And that's really the majority of the time. It's not the filming; it's more of what happens after the film's done. The filming's done, right?
Yeah, there is a process to it, and a lot of that, you kind of pick up along the way, and Google's your friend. Like I used the Google search so many times on the first few of my own edits that I did, just to look up how I did stuff, like how do you do this in Adobe Premiere, for example, and so it was just a lot of that and trial and error. And then green screen itself was a trial and error, and he let me have their extra foldable green screen. And so that's the one I use now. And I bought a bunch of like little lights and small lights that I can shine around and try to mess with that. And it just takes a lot of practice, but after a while I feel like now I'm to a point where I can more accurately or better use the green screen, or better frame the shots, or edit them later. So there's a process that needs to be sort of learned. And as I was saying, as long as I sort of did the work up front to like get to a point where I'm comfortable with how the video, kind of looks quality wise, then I can sort of streamline that process so that I can become faster at doing it. But knowing my time and not wanting to sacrifice playing games, that's where I said I could probably do 2 a month, and keep that schedule, because you want to keep a good schedule going online.
Right. Absolutely.
So
that was really sort of your experience with, taking sort of the joy of the hobby that you'd experience and sort of sharing that out with others, first with your friends and then kind of to the wider, online community. That's right. And for me, I've not done any content creation, but
you ran a large like gathering, like what how large was that? 50 people?
Yeah, so we'd have consistently when we do these meetups, and they were every other Friday night. We played with the schedule a lot, but we'd have anywhere from like 30 to 50 people, and sometimes more come. And for me, it was that I later in life I discovered this hobby, and I had seen when I'd introduce it to my friends how engaged they would be, how it was just it was something that they had never even heard about. They hadn't heard of like any of the games I owned. They hadn't heard of any of them.
Right.
And they're just so used to the sort of Walmart mass market type style games that they had just sort of discounted as not being something they'd be interested in.
Right.
And so when I'd see, I think it was like when you teach a game, and then you'd see them play it, and then you'd see that instant when it just sort of clicked, and they saw what you saw out of the game. That was just kind of a magical moment for me. And so I said, well, how can I do this and introduce this in a bigger way, kind of in the community? And interesting enough, started at my church as well.
Oh, cool.
And we just started doing sort of like a get together with just people from the church. And that kind of grew, and then we expanded it out to the community. We started doing, Facebook and meetup advertising and some emailing. Cool. And so we'd have, and we really, for me it was I had when I got into the hobby, because my family will play games but not super frequently. So rather than sort of bother them all the time, like, hey, you want to play this game? You want to play this game? I was looking around for meetups and other groups to play in. Yeah. And what I found was that a lot of these meetup groups were made up of like really hardcore gamers, right? And so they weren't really environments that, like, say you'd want to bring your family to, or maybe, your spouse to, because maybe they're just looking to have a good time, but everybody else there is really competitive. Right. So with the meetups that we did, we really wanted them to be like family game nights. So we even welcomed children, as long as they could sit at a table and occupy themselves. And it was just a really really positive experience, because not only did we meet a lot of new friends in the community, but I think it was great to introduce this awesome hobby to a lot more people. So
That's
yeah,
awesome.
enjoyed it. Yeah, once
Yeah.
COVID's over, it'd be great to start something
Yeah.
up in North Carolina too.
Yeah, I think for now we're all kind of sticking to 3 or 4 players max.
Yeah, very low.
And only with people that are self either quarantining, using masks regularly when they do go out, and keeping those social distances. So
yeah, my plays are much less consistent, and it's really just been the new group that I was playing with you guys, and just my family. So.
And I think that's probably the way it's going to look for a lot of us out there. But I wanted to sort of just introduce ourselves to everybody and let you know where we're coming from, sort of what we're on about here at Meeple Mentor, and introduce you guys to Jay. We'll probably be doing a series of videos like this where we just chat about various board gaming topics. So feel free to subscribe to make sure you don't miss any of those videos as they come out. Not sure yet on a schedule, but certainly subscribing will make sure that you don't miss it. And if you have any ideas or suggestions even for topics that you want to hear us talk about, hey, comment below or send us a message. We'd be glad to take a look.
Awesome. Thanks
for coming, and we'll see you guys next time.
Yeah, catch you next time. Bye.